Imagine coming home after weeks of living a lie. You walk through your own front door expecting the usual arguments, the tears, or maybe just the cold shoulder. But instead, you get silence. You walk into the living room, and there's your 6-year-old son, sketching furiously with a purple crayon. You lean over expecting to see a superhero or a monster. Instead, you see your family. Your wife is there, your son is there, and standing next to them is a tall man with a red scarf. You smile and ask, "Is that me, buddy?" And he looks up, eyes completely dead, and says, "No, that's Daddy. You're just the visitor." Welcome to the story of a man who didn't just lose his family. He was replaced, stroke by crayon stroke. The gravel of the driveway crunched under the tires of Arthur Pendleton's Audi Q7, a sound that usually signaled relief. Home. His castle. But tonight the sound felt like dry bones snapping. Arthur killed the engine and sat in the dark for a moment, the silence of the cabin pressing against his ears. He checked his reflection in the rearview mirror. He looked tired, but handsome. The grey at his temples was distinguished, not aging. He rubbed a smudge of lipstick, Isabel's shade, rouge noir, off his neck with a wet wipe he kept in the glove box, specifically for this purpose. He had been gone for 10 days. The official story was a conference in Seattle. The truth was a suite at the Fairmont with Isabel room service and the kind of intoxicating, reckless validation that made him feel 25 again. He loved his wife, Charlotte, in the abstract, dutiful way one loves a comfortable old sweater. But Isabel was the fire. He grabbed his suitcase, practiced his weary long flight smile, and unlocked the front door. He expected the noise. Usually when he returned from these trips, the house was a chaotic symphony of domestic life. The TV blaring cartoons, the clatter of pots from the kitchen, Charlotte asking if he'd remembered to pick up milk. Instead, the house was silent. Not empty, just silent. The air smelled of lavender and something savory, maybe roast chicken. It smelled settled, peaceful. "Charlotte," he called out, dropping his keys in the ceramic bowl. The clatter was startlingly loud. No answer. He walked into the living room. The late afternoon sun was filtering through the sheer curtains, casting long golden bars across the hard wood floor. In the center of the rug sat his son, Leo. Leo was 6 years old, small for his age, with Charlotte's messy blonde hair and Arthur's brooding eyes. He was lying on his stomach, surrounded by a chaotic halo of Crayola crayons. He was gripping a purple one so hard his knuckles were white, shading something with intense rhythmic focus. Scritch, scritch, scritch. "Hey, buddy," Arthur said, softening his voice. He walked over and knelt beside the boy. "Daddy's home." Leo didn't look up. The rhythm of the crayon didn't break. Scritch, scritch. Arthur felt a flicker of irritation. He was the provider, the patriarch, returning from the hunt or the conference room, effectively the same thing. He deserved a greeting. He reached out and gently touched Leo's shoulder. "Leo, did you hear me? I said Daddy's home. I brought you that Lego set from the airport." Leo stopped drawing. He slowly lifted his head. His eyes were wide blue and unsettlingly calm. There was no excitement, no anger, just a blank recognition, as if he were looking at the mailman. "Hi, Arthur," Leo said. Arthur blinked. The air left his lungs. "Arthur. Since when do you call me Arthur?" Leo shrugged, turning back to his paper. "Mom says names are important. We have to use the right names." Arthur stood up, his knees cracking. A cold prickle of unease ran down his spine. He looked toward the kitchen. Charlotte. Charlotte appeared in the doorway. She was wearing a cream-colored dress he hadn't seen before, her hair pinned up loosely. She looked radiant, younger. There were no dark circles under her eyes, no tension in her jaw. She was holding a glass of white wine. "You're back," she said. It wasn't a question. It wasn't an accusation. It was a statement of fact, devoid of emotion. "I'm back," Arthur said, waiting for the hug or the passive-aggressive comment about his lack of calling. Neither came. How was everything while I was away?" "Fine," Charlotte said, taking a sip of wine. "Actually, it was wonderful. Leo has been making so much progress." "Progress?" Arthur looked down at his son. "With his art." Charlotte smiled. It was a genuine smile, but it didn't seem aimed at Arthur. It was aimed at the air, at the room, at the life she was living without him. "Show him Leo." Leo sat up and held up the paper. It was a classic child's drawing, a house with a crooked chimney and a yellow sun in the corner wearing sunglasses. On the green grass stood 3 stick figures. One was clearly a woman drawn with yellow hair and a big smile, Charlotte. One was a small boy, holding a red ball, Leo. And the third figure standing closest to the woman and the boy was a tall man. Arthur squinted. "That's a nice picture, Leo. Is that us?" Leo shook his head. "It's Mummy, me, and Daddy." Arthur pointed to the tall figure. The figure was drawn in heavy black wax, but it had distinct features. The man was wearing a bright red scarf drawn with frantic loops, and across the stick figure's face, Leo had drawn a jagged purple line. A scar. A mask. "That's Daddy?" Arthur asked, a nervous chuckle escaping his throat. "But I don't have a red scarf, buddy." "And what's that on his face?" "That's the mark," Leo whispered reverently. "And where am I?" Arthur asked, scanning the paper. "Where is Arthur?" Leo flipped the paper over. The back was blank white. "You're not in the picture," Leo said simply. "There wasn't enough room." Arthur looked at Charlotte, expecting her to correct the boy, to laugh it off as a silly phase. Oh, you know kids, their imaginations run wild. But Charlotte just stared at the drawing with a look of terrifying affection. "It's a masterpiece, Leo. Put it on the fridge, over the old ones." "The old ones?" Arthur asked. "The ones of you," Charlotte said, turning back to the kitchen. "They were getting cluttered. We needed space for the new reality." Arthur stood alone in the living room. The smell of the roast chicken suddenly made him nauseous. He looked at the fridge. Indeed, the gallery of his life drawings of him playing catch him in his suit, him driving the car, was gone. The fridge was bare, waiting. Leo walked past him, clutching the new drawing like a holy scripture. As he passed his father's leg, he whispered one more thing. "He plays better than you. And he doesn't smell like the lady with the flower perfume." Arthur froze. Isabel wore gardenia perfume. The front door was locked. He had the key. But as he stood there, Arthur Pendleton realized he had been locked out of something much stronger than a house. Arthur spent the first night in the guest bedroom. Charlotte hadn't told him to sleep there. She just hadn't made space for him in the master. When he walked into their bedroom, the bed was made with military precision, but only one side looked slept in. On his bedside table, usually cluttered with his reading glasses, his watch winder, and his stack of Economist magazines, there was nothing. It had been wiped clean. A vase of fresh hydrangeas stood there instead. He didn't argue. Guilt is a powerful sedative, and Arthur was overdosing on it. She knows, he told himself. The perfume comment. Leo knows. They all know. The next morning, Arthur tried to regain control. He was a senior VP at a logistics firm. He managed crises for a living. He treated this like a supply chain disruption. Identify the bottleneck, remove it, restore flow. He woke up early at 6 a.m., intending to make pancakes a super dad move. He walked into the kitchen, tying his robe tight. The table was already set. Pancakes were already made. A stack of them, steaming, sat in the center of the table. Leo was eating happily. Charlotte was sipping coffee, reading a paperback novel. "Good morning," Arthur said, his voice croaking. Who made breakfast?" Charlotte didn't look up from her book. "We had a helper." "A helper." Arthur poured himself coffee, but the pot was empty. He frowned. "What helper?" "The cleaning lady doesn't cook." "Not her," Leo said, his mouth full of syrup. "Mr. Red." Arthur dropped his mug. It didn't break, but it clattered loudly into the sink. "Mr. Red, the guy from the drawing." "He's not just in the drawing." "Arthur," Charlotte said, finally looking at him. Her eyes were cool, detached. "He helps where you create deficits." "Is this some kind of joke?" Arthur snapped. The guilt was giving way to anger. "Is this a punishment? Because if it is, it's childish. I work hard for this family. I travel to keep us in this house, in this neighborhood." "You travel," Charlotte repeated. She stood up, walking over to him. She was close enough that he could smell her skin, vanilla and rain. "But are you here?" She reached out and tapped his chest. "You're a ghost, Arthur. You haunt this house. You rattle chains, you drop off money, and then you vanish. Ghosts don't get to be angry when the living move on." Arthur stormed out of the kitchen. He needed to clear his head. He needed Isabel. He drove to a Starbucks 3 towns over, parked in the back, and dialed Isabel's number. "Hey, baby," Isabel answered on the first ring. "Missing me already?" "Something's wrong," Arthur whispered, watching a woman in a minivan struggle with a stroller. "Charlotte. She's acting strange. And Leo. They have this imaginary friend. A man." Isabel laughed. It was a throaty, sexy sound that usually made his knees weak. Today it sounded grating. A man like a lover. No. An imaginary friend. Leo draws him. He calls him Daddy. He says he was there while I was gone. "Arthur, honey." Isabel sighed. "You're paranoid. You're feeling guilty because we had such a wild week. It's projecting. Charlotte is probably just lonely and acting out." "Leo said he doesn't smell like the lady with the flower perfume," Arthur said. Silence on the other end. "That's specific," Isabel said, her voice tighter. "Arthur, you need to be careful. If she knows she's playing games, she's gaslighting you. Don't let her win." "I won't," Arthur said. "I'm the man of the house." "Exactly. Go home. Assert yourself. Remind them who pays the bills." Arthur hung up. He felt bolstered. Isabel was right. This was psychological warfare. Charlotte had likely smelled the perfume on his laundry weeks ago and concocted this scheme to drive him crazy. The Mr. Red thing was a fabrication. He drove home with renewed purpose. He would confront Charlotte. He would demand the nonsense stop. He pulled into the driveway. It was raining now, a grey drizzle that turned the afternoon dark. As he walked up the front steps, he noticed something caught in the rose bushes near the porch. It was a piece of fabric sodden with rain. Arthur reached down and untangled it from the thorns. He held it up to the dim light. It was a long knitted scarf, bright red. It wasn't a cheap scarf. It was cashmere, heavy, expensive, and distinctly masculine. And it smelled. Arthur brought the wet wool to his face. It didn't smell like the store. It smelled of pipe tobacco and ozone. A distinct, heavy scent. He stared at the front door. If Mr. Red was imaginary, whose scarf was this? He unlocked the door and stepped inside. The house was dark. "Charlotte," he called out. Silence. He walked into the living room. The TV was off. The kitchen was empty. He went upstairs, his heart hammering against his ribs. He pushed open Leo's bedroom door. The room was empty. Leo wasn't there. He ran to the master bedroom. Empty. The closets were open. Charlotte's clothes were there. Leo's toys were there. They hadn't left. "Charlotte!" Arthur screamed. He heard a noise, a scratching sound. Scritch, scritch, scritch. It was coming from the basement. Arthur had finished the basement 2 years ago. A man cave with a pool table he never used, and a wine cellar. He opened the basement door. The air that rushed up was freezing cold, much colder than the rest of the house. Leo. He walked down the carpeted stairs. The lights were off, but a faint glow came from the corner of the main room. Leo was sitting on the floor under the pool table. He had a flashlight. He was drawing. Arthur rushed over and grabbed the boy's arm. "Leo, where is your mother?" Leo looked up, blinding Arthur with the flashlight beam. "She's with him." "With who?" "Daddy." "I am Daddy," Arthur shouted, shaking the boy. "No," Leo said calmly. "You're Arthur. Daddy is in the wall." Leo pointed. Arthur looked at the far wall of the basement. It was drywall painted a neutral beige. But there, right in the center at eye level, was a drawing. It wasn't on paper. It was drawn directly onto the wall in black permanent marker. It was a door, a crude, lopsided door drawn by a child. "He lives in there," Leo whispered, and he took Mummy inside to show her his house. Arthur stared at the marker drawing. It was just ink on a wall. It was nonsense. But then he saw it. At the bottom of the drawn door, where the threshold would be there, was a tiny gap in the drywall, a crack, and protruding from the crack was the fringed end of a red cashmere scarf. The other end of the scarf Arthur was holding in his hand. Arthur pulled on the scarf in his hand. The fringe sticking out of the wall moved. Someone was holding the other end. From inside the wall, Arthur gripped the wet cashmere scarf, his knuckles white. The tension on the other side of the wall was palpable, a heavy, living resistance. It wasn't a nail snagging the fabric. It was a hand. "Come out!" Arthur roared. He didn't sound like a senior VP anymore. He sounded feral. He yanked the scarf with both hands, planting his feet against the baseboard. There was a sharp, tearing sound, followed by a grunt from behind the drywall. The scarf suddenly went slack, sending Arthur stumbling backward into the pool table. He held the scarf, now ripped in half. The fringe protruding from the crack in the wall was gone. "Daddy is hiding," Leo whispered from under the pool table. The boy's voice was devoid of fear, filled only with a strange conspiratorial excitement. "You made him mad!" Arthur scrambled to his feet. He looked around the basement for a weapon. He grabbed a heavy brass candlestick from the mantel of the fake fireplace. He marched back to the drawing of the door. "Arthur, stop!" The voice came from the top of the stairs. Charlotte stood there, silhouetted by the hallway light. She looked terrified, clutching her robe at her throat. "Get Leo out of here," Arthur commanded, not looking at her. He raised the candlestick. "There is someone in the wall, Charlotte. I'm going to kill him." "There's no one in the wall," Charlotte screamed, rushing down the stairs. "You're drunk or you're high." "Look at you." Arthur didn't listen. He swung the heavy brass base into the drywall. Crack! The gypsum crumbled. Dust puffed into the air. He swung again. Crack! A hole opened up, dark and jagged, right where Leo had drawn the doorknob. Arthur kicked the drywall, his Italian leather boot smashing through the insulation. He ripped away chunks of the wall with his bare hands, ignoring the scrape of rough edges against his skin. He created an opening large enough to step through. He shone Leo's flashlight into the void. It wasn't just a space between studs. When they had renovated the basement, the contractors had boxed in the area around the furnace and the main water line to create a clean look. Arthur had assumed it was just dead space. It wasn't. Inside the crawl space, squeezed between the furnace duct and the concrete foundation, was a makeshift room, a nest. Arthur stepped inside the heat from the furnace, humming against his face. The smell was overpowering here, stale sweat pipe tobacco, and something rot sweet like old fruit. "Oh my God," Arthur breathed. On the floor was a sleeping bag, filthy and grey. Scattered around it were empty wrappers of granola bars, the organic kind Charlotte bought for Leo's lunches. There were water bottles filled with yellow liquid. But it was the walls of the crawl space that made Arthur's stomach turn over. They were covered in photos. Polaroids. Hundreds of them. Arthur shone the light across the collage. They were photos of him. Arthur sleeping in his bed, mouth open. Arthur shaving in the bathroom taken from the crack in the door. Arthur sitting in his home office, viewed from the window. Arthur arguing with Charlotte in the kitchen. And over every single face of Arthur Pendleton, a piece of purple crayon had been used to cross him out. A violent, waxy X. In the center of the shrine sat a small wooden box. Arthur crouched down and opened it. Inside were his things. His spare car key. His gold cufflinks that had gone missing 2 months ago. A lock of his hair. And a driver's license, Arthur's old one, expired. But the photo had been peeled off and replaced with a crude sketch of a man with a red scarf. "He's been here," Arthur whispered, his voice trembling. "Charlotte, he's been watching us. For months." He turned around to show her. He expected to see her horrified. He expected her to scream, to call the police, to grab Leo and run. Charlotte was standing at the hole in the wall. She wasn't looking at the nest. She was looking at Arthur. Her expression was unreadable. Cold. "You found his room," she said flatly. "His room. Charlotte, call 911. There is a stalker living in our walls. He has pictures of me sleeping." Charlotte stepped through the hole. She looked at the sleeping bag, the urine bottles, the obsessive photos. She didn't flinch. She reached out and straightened one of the photos where the tape was peeling. "He's not a stalker, Arthur," she said softly. "He's the understudy." Arthur froze. "The what?" "You're never here," Charlotte said, turning to him. In the claustrophobic red light of the furnace, she looked demonic. "You're with Isabel. Or the one before Isabel. I forget her name. Sarah." "You think I don't know. You think I'm stupid." Arthur's mouth opened and closed. You did this. You let a bum live in our wall because I cheated." "I didn't let a bum in. I let a father in," Charlotte corrected him. "Leo needed a dad. I needed a husband. But we didn't want to disrupt your lifestyle, Arthur. We know how much you love your conferences. So we compromised. We got a fill-in. He watches. He learns. He practices being you. Better than you. You're insane. Arthur backed away, hitting his head on a low duct. You are actually psychotic. Am I? Charlotte stepped closer. He knows Leo's allergies. Do you? He knows my cycle. Do you? He knows how to fix the sink. He listened to you for 6 months, Arthur. He knows your voice. He knows your walk. Where is he? Arthur hissed, looking around the dark corners of the crawl space. Where is the freak? He's close. Charlotte smiled. He's ready for the final act. Arthur shoved past her, scrambling out of the hole in the wall. He grabbed Leo, who was still sitting under the pool table, humming a tune. We're leaving, Arthur said, hoisting the boy onto his hip. Leo felt heavy, dead weight. I don't want to go with you, Leo said calmly. You're the bad copy. Shut up, Arthur yelled, carrying the boy up the stairs. He reached the ground floor. He needed to get to the car. He needed to get to the police station. He would have Charlotte committed. He would get a restraining order. He threw the front door open. Standing on the porch, blocking his path, was a man. He was tall. He wore a dark wool coat, and around his neck was a brand-new bright red cashmere scarf. The man looked up. He had Arthur's face. Not exactly. It wasn't a mask. It was structure. The hair was cut the same way. The jawline was covered in a beard trimmed to the exact millimeter of Arthur's. He was wearing Arthur's clothes, the navy suit Arthur had left at the dry cleaners last week. But the eyes were wrong. They were hollow, hungry, and wide. Hello, Arthur, the man said. His voice was a perfect mimicry of Arthur's baritone, but with a strange, rasping edge, as if his vocal cords had been sanded down. Who are you? Arthur gasped, stepping back. The man smiled. His teeth were stained yellow. Tobacco. I'm Dad, the man said. He stepped forward. Arthur tried to slam the door, but Charlotte was behind him. She grabbed Arthur's arm, her grip shockingly strong. Don't be rude, Charlotte whispered in his ear. Introduce yourself to your replacement. Arthur punched backward, hitting Charlotte in the shoulder. She cried out, releasing him. Arthur dropped Leo, who immediately ran to the man in the red scarf, hugging his legs, and bolted. He didn't run to his car. He ran into the rainy night, sprinting down the driveway, his lungs burning the image of his own face smiling back at him, seared into his mind. Arthur didn't stop running until he reached the gas station a mile down the road. He was soaked, shivering, and missing a shoe. The attendant, a teenager with acne and a nose ring, stared at him as he burst through the glass doors. Phone, Arthur wheezed, slamming his hands on the counter. Call the police. The teenager blinked slowly, pulling an earbud out. Sir, you need to buy something if you want to use the... Call the damn police. My wife. There's an intruder. He looks like me. The cops arrived 10 minutes later. By then, Arthur had calmed down enough to realize how he sounded. He was shivering in a borrowed towel, one shoe, on smelling of rain and fear. He told them everything. The drawing, the wall, the nest. The man in the doorway who looked like his twin. The officers, Officer Miller and Officer Hernandez, exchanged a look. It was the domestic dispute look. Okay, Mr. Pendleton, Miller said. Let's go to the house and sort this out. They drove him back. The ride was silent. Arthur sat in the back of the cruiser, the hard plastic seat digging into his spine. He felt small. When they pulled into the driveway, the house was blazing with light. It looked warm, inviting. Arthur stayed in the car while the officers went to the door. Charlotte answered. She was wearing a cardigan and holding a tea towel. She looked the picture of suburban concern. She spoke to the officers, gesturing frantically. Then she pointed to the cruiser. Officer Miller came back to the car and opened the door. "Mr. Pendleton," Miller said, his voice harder now. "Your wife says you had a psychotic break. She says you came home drunk, started smashing the basement wall with a candlestick, and then ran off, screaming about clones." "She's lying," Arthur screamed. "Go into the basement. Look at the wall. Look at the nest." "We looked," Miller said. "We saw the hole you punched in the wall. There's nothing in there, sir. Just insulation and pipes, no photos, no sleeping bag." Arthur felt the blood drain from his face. "That's impossible. I saw it. I was inside it." "She also says you've been under a lot of stress," Hernandez added, leaning in. "Something about a double life, an Isabel," Arthur choked. That has nothing to do with this." "Look, sir," Miller said. "She doesn't want to press charges for the property damage. She just wants you to get help. She's packed a bag for you. She thinks it's best if you stay at a hotel tonight." Miller handed him a duffel bag. It was his gym bag. "Where is the man?" Arthur demanded. "The man in the red scarf." "There was no one else in the house, sir. Just your wife and your son. The boy was asleep." "He wasn't asleep. He was hugging the intruder." "Sir, take the bag. Go to the Marriott. Sleep it off. If you come back here tonight, we arrest you for disturbing the peace. Do you understand?" Arthur stood on the curb, clutching his gym bag, watching the police cruiser pull away. Then he watched the lights in his house go out one by one. He was exiled. Arthur checked into the Motel 6 near the highway. It was all he could afford with the cash in his pocket. He realized with a jolt that his wallet was still in the house on the kitchen counter. He had his phone, thank God. He called Isabel. "Arthur." Her voice was groggy. It was 2 a.m. "They erased it," Arthur whispered, pacing the small, cigarette-burned room. "Isabel, I'm not crazy." Charlotte hid the evidence. She cleaned out the wall before the cops got there. "She's working with him." "Working with who?" "The imposter. The guy who looks like me." Isabel sighed. A long, weary sigh. "Arthur, I think you need to see a doctor. This sounds manic. You're sounding like my ex-husband before he went to rehab." "I'm not on drugs, I saw him." Okay. Just get some sleep. We'll talk tomorrow." She hung up. Arthur didn't sleep. He sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the door, waiting for the handle to turn. He checked his bank accounts on his phone. Access denied. He tried again. Incorrect password. He tried his email. Password changed 2 hours ago. A cold sweat broke out on his forehead. He tried to log into his company portal. Account disabled. Who'll contact HR. "He's fast," Arthur whispered. "He's so fast." The next morning, Arthur put on the clothes from the gym bag, sweatpants, and a wrinkled polo shirt. He looked like a vagrant. He drove his Audi. At least he still had the keys to his office downtown. He needed to talk to IT. He needed to get his money. He needed to prove he was Arthur Pendleton. He walked into the lobby of the logistics firm. The security guard, Ralph, who Arthur had nodded to for 5 years, looked up. "Can I help you, sir?" Ralph asked, stepping out from behind the desk. "Ralph, it's me. Arthur. I left my badge at home." Ralph squinted. Mr. Pendleton. Yes, obviously. Mr. Pendleton is already upstairs, sir. Ralph said, his hand drifting toward his radio. He came in at 7:30. Said he lost his badge too, actually. Had a new one printed. Arthur felt the floor tilt. That's not me. I'm me. Sir, you look rough, Ralph said, keeping his distance. The Mr. Pendleton upstairs is in a meeting with the partners. He brought donuts. I don't eat donuts, Arthur screamed. I'm on a keto diet. Call him down here. I'm going to have to ask you to leave, Ralph said, unclipping his taser. You're making a scene. Arthur backed away. He looked at the glass reflection of the lobby. He saw a man with dark circles under his eyes, unshaven, wearing dirty sweatpants. Then he looked past the guard to the elevator banks. The doors opened. A group of men in suits walked out, laughing. In the center was the man. He was wearing Arthur's favorite charcoal suit. He was clean-shaven, radiant, holding a Starbucks cup. He was laughing at a joke the CEO made. He clapped the CEO on the back, something Arthur was always too afraid to do. The CEO smiled. The imposter looked across the lobby. His eyes locked onto Arthur's. There was no fear, no recognition, just a slight pitying smile. The imposter raised his coffee cup in a mock toast, then turned and walked toward the conference room. Arthur lunged. That's him. That's the fraud. Ralph the guard tackled him. Arthur hit the marble floor hard. The wind knocked out of him. Police! Ralph shouted into his radio. Arthur was dragged out of the building of the company he had helped build. He was thrown onto the sidewalk. If you come back, you'll be arrested for corporate espionage and trespassing. The head of security spat at him. Arthur sat on the concrete people, walking around him like he was a rock in a stream. He had no money, no job, no home. His phone buzzed, a text message. It was from Charlotte. Photo attachment. It was a picture of the fridge. The masterpiece was there, the drawing of the man with the red scarf. But next to it was a new drawing. It was a drawing of a stick figure, man alone outside in the rain. He had X's for eyes. The text underneath read, "We're so happy now. Please don't spoil it." The new dad actually listens. Arthur stared at the phone. Rage, hot and blinding, replaced the fear. They thought they could delete him. They thought they could just replace him with a Xerox copy. He knew one thing the imposter didn't have. He didn't have Arthur's history. He didn't have the deep, dirty secrets. Arthur stood up. He knew where he had to go. Not to the police. Not to Isabel. He had to go to the source. The house. He had bought the house 6 years ago from an estate sale. The previous owner had died in the master bedroom. An old man named Silas Vance. No, not Vance. Silas Thorne. No. Silas Blackwood. Arthur remembered finding a box of journals in the attic when they moved in. He had meant to throw them out, but he'd shoved them in the back of the garage rafters instead. Charlotte and the understudy might have cleaned the basement, but they wouldn't have checked the garage rafters. Arthur got back into his car. He wasn't going to the front door this time. He was going to war. Arthur parked the Audi 3 blocks away. He couldn't risk the engine noise alerting them. Or him. He walked through the neighbors' yards, avoiding the motion sensor floodlights, moving like a criminal in the neighborhood where he was once the Homeowners Association treasurer. The rain had stopped, leaving the night sharp and cold. The house, his house, glowed in the distance like a lantern. Through the bay window of the dining room, he could see them. They were having dinner. It was Taco Tuesday. Arthur hated Taco Tuesday. He hated the mess, the smell of cumin that lingered in the curtains, the way the hard shells shattered when you bit them. He usually stayed late at the office on Tuesdays. But the man in the window, the imposter, seemed to love it. Arthur watched from behind the azalea bush as the man laughed, his head thrown back, a dab of sour cream on his nose. Charlotte reached over and wiped it off with her thumb, her face soft and open in a way Arthur hadn't seen in a decade. Leo was bouncing in his chair, talking rapidly, using his hands. The man was listening, intently, not checking a phone, not glancing at a watch. Listening. Arthur felt a stone form in his throat. It wasn't just anger anymore. It was a sickening realization that the performance inside was better than the reality he had provided. He tore his eyes away and crept toward the detached garage. He still had the remote in the car, but he couldn't use it. It would make too much noise. He went to the side door, locked. He cursed silently. He patted his pockets. No keys. He looked around the garden bed. Under the fake rock. No Charlotte had moved that years ago. He remembered the loose window pane on the east side of the garage. He had been meaning to fix it for 3 summers. He had never gotten around to it. Finally, he thought bitterly, my procrastination pays off. He worked his fingers under the wood frame and shimmied the glass up. It groaned, a sound of wood on wood, but the laughter from the house covered it. He squeezed through the opening, tumbling onto the concrete floor of the garage. It smelled of motor oil and sawdust. Familiar. Safe. He turned on his phone's flashlight, keeping the beam low. He scanned the rafters. They're tucked behind a stack of Christmas decorations, and a box labeled Leo's Baby Clothes was a dusty cardboard box. Arthur found the ladder, climbed up, and dragged the box down. He sat on the cold concrete and ripped it open. Musty paper smell filled the air. These were the journals of Silas Blackwood. Arthur had skimmed one years ago, thought it was the ramblings of a senile old man, and tossed them up here. Now he read with the desperation of a drowning man. He flipped past entries about garden pests and grocery lists until he found the change in handwriting. The ink went from blue ballpoint to heavy, jagged black felt tip. October 14th, 1998. The house is hungry. I feel it in the floorboards. Martha left 3 months ago, but I still hear her in the kitchen. I wanted her back so badly. I think I made a hole in the air. The silence is too loud. It needs to be filled. November 2nd, 1998. I woke up and the coffee was already made. I thought I did it, but the pot was hot. I live alone. Who made the coffee? Arthur's hands trembled. He turned the pages faster. December 10th, 1998. I saw him today. He was sitting in my chair. He looked like me, but better. He had my face, but without the liver spots. He had my voice, but without the stutter. He told me his name was Silas. I asked him who I was then. He told me I was the draft. Arthur froze. The draft? He read the final entry dated 2 days before Silas Blackwood had died of a heart attack in the master bedroom. It is not a ghost. It is a filler. Nature abhors a vacuum. A man's life is a container. If the man steps out of the container, mentally, emotionally, physically, something else will pour in to take the shape. It is built from the desire of those left behind. Martha wanted a husband who listened. The house wanted a master who fixed the roof. I was neither. So they grew one. He is solidifying. My hands are becoming transparent. I am the smudge on the page. He is the permanent marker. Arthur dropped the journal. A filler, he whispered. He wasn't being haunted. He was being overwritten. Finding some light reading, Arthur. Arthur screamed and scrambled backward, knocking over a stack of paint cans. The garage lights flickered on. Standing by the door connecting the garage to the garden was the imposter. He wasn't wearing the red scarf now. He was wearing Arthur's weekend flannel, the one Arthur thought made him look rugged. But on this man actually looked rugged. He held a wrench in his hand. He wasn't holding it like a weapon. He was holding it like a tool. He had been fixing the lawnmower. "How did you get in here?" Arthur stammered, holding the journal like a shield. "I live here," the imposter said calmly. His eyes were terrifying. They were perfectly Arthur's eyes, but there was zero doubt behind them. No anxiety. No guilt. Just absolute, concrete certainty of his own existence. "You're a fake," Arthur spat. "I know what you are. You're a filler. You're made of crayons and wishful thinking." The imposter stepped closer. He smelled of pine soap and honest sweat. He didn't smell like Isabel's perfume. "Arthur," the man said, his voice deep and resonant. "Look at you. You're a mess. You're breaking into a garage to read the diary of a dead man. Meanwhile, inside Leo just ate 3 tacos. He told me about his day at school. He told me about the bully Jason. I told him how to handle it. Do you know the bully's name?" Arthur opened his mouth, but nothing came out. He didn't know the bully's name. "I didn't think so," the imposter said. "You see, you think you're the protagonist of this story. But you're not. You're the empty space. I'm the picture." "I'm going to kill you," Arthur snarled, standing up. He grabbed a tire iron from the workbench. The imposter didn't flinch. He looked at the tire iron, then back at Arthur with pity. "You can't kill me, Arthur. I'm essential. You're redundant. If you strike me, you traumatize Leo. You ruin Charlotte's life. Again. Is that your plan, to prove you love them by destroying their happiness?" Arthur's grip on the iron loosened. The logic was twisted, but it pierced him. "What do you want?" Arthur whispered. "I want you to leave," the imposter said. "Go away. Fade out. Let us be. This is my house, my family." "It was your house," the imposter corrected. "Now it's a home. There's a difference." The imposter reached out and gently took the tire iron from Arthur's hand. Arthur was too weak to stop him. The man's grip was like steel. "Go, Arthur, before you disappear completely." The imposter turned and walked back toward the house. He paused at the door. "Oh, and Arthur, Isabel called. She's pregnant. You should probably deal with that." "I certainly won't." The door clicked shut. Arthur stood in the fluorescent hum of the garage. The journal at his feet, the tire iron gone, and the crushing weight of the news pressing on his chest. Isabel. Pregnant. He sank to the floor. He wasn't just being replaced. He was being multiplied. Arthur didn't go to Isabel's. He couldn't. If she was pregnant, that was just another anchor dragging him down another mistake he had made in a life that was rapidly deleting him. Instead, he slept in his car in a Walmart parking lot. When he woke up, the morning sun hit the dashboard, and Arthur screamed. He held his hand up to the light. The edges of his fingers were blurry. It wasn't his vision, it was his substance. He looked like a photograph where the subject had moved during the exposure. He checked the rearview mirror. His face was desaturated grey and static-filled. Silas Blackwood had been right. My hands are becoming transparent. He grabbed the journal and flipped to the back. One address remained: Beatrice. Street, Jude's home. Route 9, Silas's daughter. Arthur drove like a madman. The world outside felt dreamlike, as if the render distance of reality was dropping. Pedestrians seemed to look right through his car. He was a ghost in the making. He found Beatrice Blackwood in room 304. She was ancient, her skin like crumpled parchment, sitting in a wheelchair facing the window. "Mrs. Blackwood?" Arthur asked, his voice sounding thin in his own ears. She didn't turn. "It's Miss. I never married. The men I met were never solid enough." She sniffed the air sharply. "You smell like him, like my father. Ink and regret." "I have his journal," Arthur said, holding up the book. "Your father wrote about a filler, a thing that replaced him." Beatrice laughed, a dry, rattling sound. "Replaced, no. Replaced implies an exchange. The filler is a correction. Nature abhors a vacuum, Mr. Pendleton. My father left an emotional hole in that house, so the house grew something to fill it." "I'm not a vacuum," Arthur snapped, falling to his knees beside her. He grabbed her hand. Her skin felt warm and real. His own felt like cold mist. "I'm a man. Look at my hand, Beatrice. I'm fading. The universe is editing me out." Beatrice squinted at his translucent fingers with milky, cataract-filled eyes. "Ah, you're in the final stage. The new character tests better with the audience. You're being written out of the script." "Tell me how to kill it," Arthur begged. "You can't kill it with a gun. It's made of belief," she whispered. "As long as your wife and son believe in him, love him, he is reinforced concrete. You cannot beat him at being a good husband. He was designed to be perfect." "Then what do I do?" "You have to force him to break character," Beatrice hissed, leaning in close. "He is a mimicry. He follows a script of perfection. He cannot process pain or chaos or failure. You must introduce a flaw." "A flaw?" "Go back to the source," she commanded. "The drawing, the crayon portrait. That is his contract. That is the anchor." Arthur remembered the drawing on the fridge. The tall man in the red scarf. "You must alter the portrait," Beatrice said, her voice trembling. "You cannot erase him that just leaves a void, and he will return. You must change him. Use the same medium the boy used. Use the purple crayon. Give him a mortal wound. Give him a weakness. Turn the monster back into a man." "If I make him mortal, can I kill him?" "If you make him mortal, he can die." Beatrice agreed. "But be warned, once he feels pain, he will fight for his life. And he has the strength of the house behind him." Arthur stood up. He felt a flicker of heat in his chest, pushing back the grey coldness. "I'm already dead, Beatrice," he said. "I have nothing to lose." He ran out of the nursing home. He had a plan. It was insane, it was childish, but it was all he had. He drove back to the house as the sun began to set. The windows were dark. They were asleep. Arthur walked to the front door. He didn't try to use his key. He didn't knock. He picked up a heavy landscaping rock from the garden. He wasn't sneaking in this time. He was done being the ghost. He smashed the glass of the front door side panel. The alarm began to shriek a piercing wail that shattered the suburban silence. Arthur reached in, unlocked the deadbolt, and kicked the door open. "Honey, I'm home," he screamed, his voice cracking with terrified rage. Upstairs he heard heavy footsteps, the footsteps of a man running with perfect athletic purpose. The imposter was coming. Arthur sprinted for the kitchen. He ripped open the junk drawer, dumping its contents onto the floor until he found it. A stubby paper-peeled Crayola crayon. Violet purple. He spun toward the fridge. The masterpiece was there. The perfect dad. Arthur uncapped the crayon. He heard the thud of feet hitting the bottom of the stairs. The imposter roared a sound like grinding stones. "Don't touch it!" Arthur slammed the drawing onto the kitchen island. He raised the purple wax. He knew exactly what to draw. The impact felt like being hit by a train. Arthur and the imposter crashed into the kitchen cabinets, shattering the wood. Jars of pasta sauce exploded, slicking the floor with red. Arthur gasped for air, his ribs screaming. The imposter was on top of him, hands clamped around Arthur's throat. The grip was iron, inhuman. "You ruined it," the imposter roared. But his voice, it wasn't the smooth baritone perfection anymore. It was cracking, high-pitched, hysterical. Arthur clawed at the hands choking him. He looked up into his own face. But the face was changing. A single violet tear, real wet and heavy, leaked from the imposter's left eye, tracing the path of the crayon mark Arthur had just drawn. "Why do I feel this?" the imposter screamed, loosening his grip to claw at his own chest. "It hurts. It hurts right here." He stumbled back, knocking over a stool. He was hyperventilating. "Daddy!" Leo was standing in the doorway, clutching his blanket. Charlotte was behind him, eyes wide with horror. "Go back to bed, Leo," Arthur wheezed, trying to stand up. But Leo ran toward the imposter. "Daddy, why are you crying?" The imposter looked at the boy. Usually this was the cue for a hug, a wise saying, a moment of perfect parenting. But Arthur had drawn a screaming mouth. He had drawn rage and pain. The imposter shoved Leo away. Hard. "Get away from me!" the imposter shrieked. "I don't know what to do. It's too loud in my head." Leo hit the floor, sliding into the spilled pasta sauce. He began to wail. Charlotte screamed, "What are you doing? You never hurt him." She rushed to Leo, placing herself between the boy and the man in the red scarf. She looked up at the imposter, and for the first time her gaze held fear, not adoration. "Who are you?" she whispered. The imposter grabbed his head, his fingers digging into his scalp. "I don't know, I'm scared. I'm so scared. I hate this house. I hate these people. I want to leave." He was unraveling. By giving him human flaws, sadness, fear, anger, Arthur had broken the loop of perfection. The creature built only for validation couldn't process the complexity of negative emotion. It was a machine trying to run a program it wasn't built for. The imposter looked at Arthur. The hate in his eyes was pure, raw, and entirely human. "You poisoned me," the imposter spat. "You made me. You." He lunged for a steak knife on the counter. Arthur didn't run. He grabbed the crayon again. He dove for the drawing on the island. No. The imposter swung the knife, slicing a deep gash into Arthur's forearm. Arthur shouted in pain, blood spraying, but he slammed the purple wax onto the paper. He drew one final thing. He drew a door, an open door, and an arrow pointing out. The impostor froze mid-swing. A wind picked up in the kitchen, not from the windows, but from the walls. The drywall groaned. The air pressure dropped, popping their ears. The impostor looked at the back door. It flew open, banging against the siding. Rain lashed into the kitchen. "I have to go," the impostor whispered. His voice was fading, sounding like a radio losing signal. "The script is over." He looked at Charlotte one last time. He looked at Leo. The sadness in his eyes was profound, the tragedy of a thing that wanted to be real, but couldn't survive the pain of it. "I was a good dad," he said softly. Then he turned and walked out the door. He didn't walk into the yard. As he stepped across the threshold into the rain, he simply unspooled. His body dissolved into a swirl of black ink and paper dust caught by the wind and scattered into the night. The red scarf fell to the porch empty. Silence returned to the kitchen. The only sound was Leo crying and the hum of the refrigerator. Arthur sat on the floor, clutching his bleeding arm. He felt heavy, solid. His hands were no longer transparent. The pain in his arm was sharp and grounding. Charlotte sat amidst the broken glass and red sauce holding Leo. She stared at the empty door. Then slowly she turned her head to look at Arthur. Her eyes were empty. There was no joy, no relief. Just the exhaustion of a woman who had woken up from a beautiful dream into a messy reality. "He's gone," she whispered. "Yeah," Arthur said, wrapping a dish towel around his arm. "He's gone." "He was perfect," she said, a sob catching in her throat. "I know," Arthur said. He stood up, his legs shaking. He walked over to them. He didn't try to hug them. He didn't try to be the hero. He just knelt down and started picking up the pieces of broken glass. "I know he was perfect, Charlotte, but he wasn't real." Arthur looked at his son, who was staring at him with suspicion and grief. "I'm not perfect, Leo," Arthur said, his voice rough. "I'm going to miss birthdays sometimes. I'm going to burn the toast. I'm going to be grumpy." He picked up the purple crayon from the floor and held it out to the boy. "But I'm the one who stays when it rains." Leo looked at the crayon. Then he looked at the empty red scarf on the porch. Slowly he reached out and took the crayon. Arthur didn't smile. He just nodded. He had won his life back. But as he looked around the wrecked kitchen, the traumatized wife and the grieving son, Arthur realized the hardest part wasn't fighting the monster. It was living with the people who had preferred the monster to him. Arthur Pendleton was home, and this time he had a lot of work to do. And that is the terrifying truth of Arthur Pendleton. We often think our families need us to be superheroes, but sometimes in our absence they create their own heroes' phantoms born of our neglect. Arthur defeated the imposter, not by being stronger, but by proving that to be human is to be flawed, to cry, and to scream. He got his house back, but trust is like a crayon drawing. Once you scribble over it, you can never quite erase the marks. If this story gave you chills, or if you've ever felt like a ghost in your own home, hit that like button. It helps the channel more than you know. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a story. I want to hear from you in the comments. If you could clone yourself to handle your daily responsibilities, would you do it? Or is the risk of being replaced too high? Let me know below. Sleep well and watch what you draw.